Welcome to Cosmic Wanderers, the podcast where we explore the mysteries of philosophy, psychology, and the unknown. Throughout history, many religions began as small, misunderstood cults, only to later become global faiths. But who decides when a belief system is a religion and not just a cult?
Hello, everyone. This is Nono. Tonight we'll dive into religions that were once outcasts, how they evolved, and the influence of media and governments in shaping their perception. Stay with us for a fascinating journey through history and belief.
Okay, so have you ever thought about where religions come from? I mean, it's a question that's been debated for centuries, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we usually think of religions as, like these big established institutions. But what if we rewind the clock all the way back to their beginnings?
Right.
What if at their core, religions and cults aren't that different? That's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. And what's interesting is that a lot of the major world religions, the ones with millions, even billions of followers, they all started with just one really charismatic person.
Huh.
Think about Jesus, Muhammad, or Buddha. They came along and they challenged the norms, the social and religious norms of their time, and they started to attract followers.
Right.
And get this, back then these people were often seen as rebels, troublemakers, even threats,
Well.
Yeah, they were often persecuted or ostracized for their ideas and for movements they were inspiring.
It's almost like the opposite of how we see religious leaders today.
Yeah, it really is. It's like a mirror image of what we often think of when we hear the word cult leader today.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
So if these founders were seen as outsiders, almost like cult leaders in the beginning, what changed?
Right. What was the turning point?
How did they go from a fringe movement to a globally recognized faith?
Well, the key difference often comes down to institutionalization. Over time, as these movements grow, they start developing, structures, hierarchies, and doctrines.
Okay.
Think about early Christianity, for example. It started as a small sect within Judaism, and as we know, it eventually became the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Right.
It's a perfect example of how historical narratives are shaped and reshaped. Whoever's in power, whoever's writing the story, they get to decide what's orthodox and what's heresy.
Yep.
If things had gone differently, the story of Jesus might have been just a few scrolls viewed as a story of a charismatic but unsuccessful preacher.
Wow, that's a really interesting point. So it makes you think about how much of what we call religious history is actually a carefully constructed narrative by those in power.
It does, doesn't it?
Okay, so let's talk about the word sect for a second.
Come on.
It's a word that makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Definitely. It's loaded.
Right, just one step away from cult.
Yeah, and it's a word that's definitely changed over time. Originally, a sect was just a group that had slightly different beliefs or practices than the main body of a religion.
Right,
Protestantism splitting off from Catholicism. That's a classic example. In fact, even Christianity itself can be seen as a sect of Judaism. But like you said, the word sect has taken on this negative connotation. It often implies something dangerous or even manipulative.
Yeah, it's like sect is now used to discredit groups that don't follow the accepted norms of a religion.
Right.
But isn't this kind of descent, this formation of sects, necessary for religion to stay relevant and to adapt to changing times?
That's a great point. Religions, like any system of belief, need to evolve to survive.
Yeah.
Sects with the new interpretations and practices can actually be catalysts for change. They push the boundaries of what's acceptable. Without these dissenting voices, religions risk becoming stagnant, out of touch with the evolving needs of their followers.
So it's a balance between keeping tradition and embracing change.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing, right? The institutions that were once considered sects themselves now have the power to decide which movements are legitimate and which are dangerous.
Exactly. The line between a reformer and a heretic can be incredibly thin, and often it's the people who win who get to write history and define those terms. It's a power dynamic that we see again and again in religious history.
Right. It's like saying one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
Exactly. It all depends on perspective and, of course, who is in control of the narrative.
Okay, so let's move on to cults. When we hear that word, it often brings up images of, dark rituals, brainwashing, tragic events like Jonestown or Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, those are extreme examples for sure, and it definitely shaped Caliphate cults.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that the world of cults is much more diverse than just the sensational cases. And maybe even more importantly, if we look closely, we might find some surprising similarities between the structures and practices of cults and those of established religions.
So are you suggesting that there's more of a continuum between cults and religions than we usually acknowledge?
Exactly. Both cults and religions often revolve around a charismatic leader who's seen as having special knowledge or a direct connection to something divine. They both tend to have doctrines that require absolute belief and obedience, and they can both exert significant control over their followers' lives.
Interesting. So like their social interactions, their financial decisions, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly.
It's like comparing the early days of Christianity to a group like Scientology, which has often been called a cult. Both demand a lot of commitment from their followers and sometimes use tactics that could be seen as manipulative or controlling.
Right.
But one is a major world religion, and the other is viewed with suspicion and skepticism.
Precisely. And I think that brings us to a really important question. Who decides what's a harmless expression of faith and what crosses the line into dangerous manipulation?
Right.
Is it just a matter of time getting in the followers and becoming mainstream? Or is there something more fundamental that separates a religion from a cult?
It seems like that line is often more blurred than we want to admit.
I think so.
Maybe it's less about the beliefs and practices of a group and more about how society sees them.
Yeah.
How much power they have and how well they control their own narrative.
You're exactly right. The power of perception, the influence of media, the role of governments, all these things play a huge role in shaping how we see what's a legitimate religion and what's a dangerous cult.
And that leads to a fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
The very institutions that were once seen as fringe movements, even cults, are now the ones who decide what's acceptable and what's not. It's a cycle of power that keeps repeating throughout history.
It really is, yeah. It's like we're holding up a mirror to society and asking some tough questions about power and authority and like what we even consider to be truth, right? And you think about it, countries like France and Germany, they have laws specifically to restrict what they call sectarian movements. But who decides what makes a group a dangerous sect? Often it's the institutions that were once viewed as sects themselves. Think about like the Catholic Church. They now have the power to define what's acceptable belief.
It's kind of like in The Matrix, where Morpheus offers Neo the red pill or the blue pill.
Yeah.
One pill makes you question everything you thought you knew, and the other lets you stay in this comfortable, constructed reality.
I see what you mean.
Choosing to really examine the history of religion and where belief systems come from. It's like taking that red pill.
Right.
Suddenly things aren't so black and white anymore.
Exactly. And it challenges us to really think critically about the information we're given. Like, why are some groups labeled cults when others with similar practices are seen as mainstream religion?
Yeah.
Why do scandals and like the Catholic Church get treated differently than, say, the Heaven's Gate cult?
Right.
If some point to see that the media plays a huge role in shaping these perceptions.
It's almost like there's this hierarchy of legitimacy when it comes to belief systems.
Yeah.
Established religions are often given the benefit of the doubt, while newer or less conventional groups are looked at with more suspicion.
That's true. And the media often amplifies those biases, sometimes without even realizing it. This all comes back to the power of narrative. Who's controlling the story? Who decides what gets reported, how it's framed, and what conclusions people should draw from it? It's so important to be aware of these things. Even when we're talking about something as personal as faith, there are these external forces shaping our understanding and influencing our judgments.
So if we're trying to answer this question of whether religions are just successful cults, it seems like the answer is in the simple yes or no.
You got it.
It's about understanding the complexities of history, power dynamics, and how society sees things.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the line between a prophet and a charlatan, between a religion and a cult, it can be incredibly blurry.
Right.
And that line can move over time and across cultures depending on who's in control and who's telling the story.
Thinking back to what we've talked about, what stands out to me is that even within established religions, you can find groups that have cult-like characteristics.
Oh, for sure.
I think about some extreme fundamentalist groups that isolate their members and demand total obedience to their interpretation of their doctrine.
Right.
They demonize anyone outside their community.
Yeah, that's a great point. It reminds us that the possibility for manipulation and abuse of power exists in any belief system, no matter how big or accepted it is.
Right.
It's not really about the label cult or religion. It's more about the dynamics of power and control that can happen in any group, especially when people are looking for belonging, meaning, or certainty.
It's like that saying, never underestimate the human capacity for both good and evil. It applies to religious movements just like anything else.
Yeah, it really does. So how can we as individuals navigate this complex world of beliefs and avoid falling into potentially harmful groups or ideologies?
That's the big question, right?
I think it starts with developing healthy skepticism, being willing to question what we're told, even if it's from people we trust or beliefs we hold dear.
Okay.
It's realizing that blind faith in any situation can be dangerous.
So it's not about rejecting faith or spirituality completely. It's about approaching them with a critical eye.
Exactly. It's about asking questions, seeking out different perspectives, and being aware of the potential for manipulation, especially in situations where there are power imbalances.
Right.
And it's especially important to watch out for groups that demand total obedience, isolate their members, or demonize people with different views.
It's like that Carl Sagan quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence."
That's a good one.
When we're looking at belief systems, whether it's a new age group or an ancient religion, we need to think critically and look for real evidence to back up the claims being made.
Absolutely. And remember, it's okay to change your mind to evolving your beliefs as you learn and grow.
Yeah, that actually shows intellectual honesty and a willingness to really engage with the world.
Yeah, it's like that saying, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right, and that applies to like spiritual promises
Yeah.
just as much as get-rich-quick schemes.
Exactly. And unfortunately, there are people and groups out there who take advantage of that. You know, they prey on people's vulnerabilities,
Right.
offering simple answers, a sense of belonging, or a path to salvation, but often at a big cost.
Yeah, we've seen this throughout history.
No, absolutely. From charismatic cult leaders like Jim Jones, who led his followers to their death in Jonestown,
Right,
to more recent examples like David Koresh and the Branch Davidian siege in Waco.
right.
These tragic events are really stark reminders of how powerful manipulation can be
Yeah,
and the terrible consequences that can come from blind belief.
it's a serious reminder that critical thinking isn't just some intellectual exercise.
Right.
It's a crucial tool to protect ourselves and others from harm.
Absolutely.
But how do we apply critical thinking to something as personal and often emotional as religious belief?
Well, it's not about dismissing faith or spirituality entirely. It's about approaching them with a discerning mind,
Okay,
a willingness to question what we assume to be true,
right.
and a commitment to looking for evidence.
So it's not just about being cautious of groups that are labeled as cults.
Right.
It's about being aware of those cult-like dynamics that can exist within any belief system.
Exactly. Even ones that are widely accepted and considered mainstream.
Right.
You need to be mindful of the warning signs.
Like what?
Groups that isolate their members, demand unquestioning obedience, demonize outsiders,
Yeah.
or promote an us versus them mentality. Those are red flags.
Yeah.
They should make you stop and ask some serious questions.
And I think it's important to remember that leaving a belief system or a group, even when you've been really involved in,
Yeah.
it's not a sign of weakness.
No, not at all.
It's a sign of strength.
Right.
A sign that you're putting your own well-being and critical thinking first.
It takes courage to step back and question what you've always believed.
It does.
To challenge the status quo, right? Even if it means going against what everyone else thinks or facing disapproval.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the blurry lines between religions and cults, what are some key things our listeners should take away from this?
I think the most important takeaway is to be discerning. Be skeptical and be willing to ask tough questions.
Okay, good.
Don't just blindly accept any belief system, no matter how appealing it sounds or how many followers it has.
Right.
Do your research, look for different perspectives, and trust your gut feeling.
And remember, critical thinking isn't about rejecting faith or spirituality.
No, it's not.
It's about engaging with those things in a more thoughtful and informed way,
Exactly.
a way that ultimately gives you more power.
It's about realizing that the search for truth is a lifelong journey.
Right.
And sometimes the most important discoveries we make are the ones that challenge our beliefs.
Yeah.
The ones that make us rethink everything we thought we knew.
Well said. So I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cosmic Wanderers. We've explored how religions once labeled as cults evolved over time and the forces that shaped their perception. Remember, questioning and understanding history helps us see the present more clearly.
Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay true to yourselves. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community for more deep dives into philosophy, psychology, and the unknown. See you next time on Cosmic Wanderers, where the journey never ends.